In this session, I will explain about the sodium-potassium pump. The diagram here shows the phospholipid bilayer. This is the phospholipid head and this is the phospholipid tail. So it consists of two layers. And this is the transport protein. The fluid here representing the axoplasm inside the cell. And the fluid here representing the extracellular fluid, which is located outside the cell. The red round structure here representing the sodium ion. We can see that the outside the cell contains 6 sodium ion, whereas inside the cell you have about 4 sodium ion. So relatively, the concentration of sodium ion is higher on the outside. The blue colored triangle here representing the potassium ion. So there are only 4 outside and there are 6 potassium ion inside the cell. So relatively, the potassium ion concentration is lower on the outside region. And you please note for the transport protein, so now it is open towards the inner part of the membrane. So there are 3 sites in which the sodium ion can bind to the transport protein, which causes 3 sodium ions to bind to this site. And then this structure representing the ATP. ATP is needed in the process in order to transport substances against its concentration gradient. ATP is hydrolyzed to form ADP and phosphate. The inorganic phosphate binds to the transport protein. So when the phosphate binds to the transport protein, it causes the transport protein to change its conformation. The sodium ion binding site now can no longer bind to the sodium ion because it already changes its shape. So the sodium ion will be released. And you note that the transport protein now opens to the outside. So the 3 sodium ion will move towards the extracellular fluid. Even though the concentration of sodium ion is lower on the inside, it will still be transported to the outside the cell. That's why it needs the ATP to supply the energy for this process. And you please take note here that the potassium ion binding site is now available to transport the potassium ion. So 2 potassium ion will bind to this region. For summary, the outside the cell, sodium ion concentration is higher. Potassium ion concentration is lower compared to the inside of the cell. So 3 sodium ion in the cell binds to a specific site of transport protein. The binding of sodium ion stimulates the hydrolysis of ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate. Inorganic phosphate will bind to the transport protein, causing the phosphorylation of the protein and changes its conformation, which causes it to pump 3 sodium ion to the outside, increasing its concentration outside the cell. So now, 2 potassium ion will bind to the transport protein. The binding of potassium ion will stimulate the inorganic phosphate to be released from the transport protein and causes the protein to change its conformation. So the transport protein will change its conformation to the original conformation. And now 2 potassium ion can no longer bind to this site and it will be released into the cell, increasing the concentration of potassium ion inside the cell. So now the protein can transport another 3 sodium ion outside the cell. Process will be repeated. So this is the summary of the sodium-potassium pump.